Welcome back to the channel. Thanks for stopping by. This is part 2 in our introduction to snakehead fishing. Part 1 was the what, where, when, and how to target them. Part 2, where we are right now, is lures and equipment. Talking about the lures and equipment, I think it's first we'll start off with the lures. And whenever I'm talking about lures, lures are basically your control. That's how you're controlling your presentation to a fish to determine whether or not they're going to engage your hook. And the things that you're concerning yourself with are always the same. You're talking about size, speed, depth, action, and color. The size for snakehead, because they are not largemouth bass, they have relatively small mouths. They're closer akin to the mouth size of smallmouth bass. I say the lure selection is small. You'll have your best success using small lures. It's not going to limit you on the size of snakehead you're going to catch. If you're using large lures, it's just going to limit the amount of hookups that you get. And who wants that? So size, small. Speed, snakeheads, whether you like it or not, are northern snakeheads. They're not like every other species of snakeheads. They're more of a finesse presentation fish. That's just all there is to it. And finesse being slower. Usually you're just moving fast enough with pretty much every lure just to get action out of the lure. The depth, that's the weight that you're going to use. Because they're in shallow water conditions, you're generally using no weight, in my opinion, up to a max of a 1/4 ounce if it's a sinking type of lure. The action, it's always the same. You want lots of action, lots of movement, lots of flash. There are times where they want a more subtle presentation, but more often than not, you can be very successful with lots of movement, lots of flash, lots of shatter. The only time of year where that's any different is usually the winter time when they're less active. Color, white and natural colors usually work the best. And I like to throw in red and blue and black, and those seem to work as well. But I wouldn't say that that's of critical importance. Now moving on to the actual lures. In my opinion, there are 5 lures that you should have in your bag at any given time when you're targeting snakeheads. I think all of them have a use. Some days, the snakehead will only hit one of these types of lures. But if you have one of them with you, you're going to have a pretty good chance of getting on fish if they're willing to feed that day. Number 1, everybody's favorite for some reason, is the hollow body frog. In my opinion, the hollow body frog is the most finesse of all the presentations and the most boring to fish and the slowest. The size that I use with the greatest success is 1.5 to 2 inches. That's just the size range that works the best. I have some that jump up to 2.25 inches, but anything above that, I generally have a lot less luck with. Speed, as I already mentioned, frog fishing is a pretty slow presentation when it comes to snakehead generally. You can have days where you fish it quickly, but for the most part, my luck comes from very slow presentations. You cast it, you allow the weight to dissipate, and then you start your retrieve. And the retrieve usually is a couple pops, let it pause again, couple pops, let it pause again. I have 2 different styles of presentations. One of them is I have the tip in the water, and I do my pause and jerks while the tip's in the water to give whatever frog I'm using to have a more swimming action. And then I'll put the rod tip at a 45-degree angle and do the pops to have more of a jumping action. So those are really the only 2 variations of retrieves that I use. The depth, they're top water, but weight wise, I generally, because of the small size, you're generally going to find them in 3/16 of an ounce up to 1/2 an ounce, which generally means you're going to be casting with spinning gear, which there's a lot of people that want to use bait casters, but for snakeheads, in my opinion, spinning gear is the optimal gear. Color, belly is the only thing that matters for hollow body frogs, so white and black bellied lures, they definitely are the ones that work the best for me. The uses of this lure for snakehead. Casting into heavy cover is absolutely their best use. There are so many times that you're chasing after snakehead that it is really tough to get another lure in there because there's snags above, snags below, snags to the left, snags to the right. You need something that is as snag free as possible, and you can also leave in the strike zone for as long as you possibly can. And hollow body frogs fit that bill. Another good time, as I mentioned in part 1, is fry guarding. You put that frog a little bit past the fry ball, you pull it into it, and you just basically let that hollow body frog pause there. And sooner or later, if the snakehead is willing to engage, if they haven't been hooked previously, as I said, they're about to get hooked. Actually, they're about to hit your frog, and then you miss it, and then you cuss. So that's what's going to happen. What's important to know about this lure is you need to bend the hooks out and up. Who cares? I hear people saying something to the effect that, it's not quite as weedless. I say who cares? If you're going to catch nothing, what difference does it make whether you're not your weedless? Snakehead are notorious for missing topwater hollow body frogs. You get it in their mouth and they're gone. One of the issues is they have such a bony skull. It's not like a lot of other species of fish. It is sometimes tough to get a really solid hook set. The only times you generally get a really good hook set with frogs is when they actually totally swallow it. And the only way most of the time that you're going to get them to swallow it is you got to let them have it in their mouth for a little bit. So whenever they hit the topwater, you have to resist the temptation to set the hook immediately. I say at least 3 seconds, but generally if you've seen snakeheads, they will carry a topwater hollow body in their mouth for 30 seconds to 2 minutes. So you don't have to be in any kind of hurry to set the hook. And as time goes on, they'll slowly gulp it down. So if you see bubbles, you definitely want to set the hook because they've swallowed it. That's the telltale sign. Anytime they're eating, if they've swallowed something, they bubble. So bam, set the hook. And final thoughts on hollow body. It is my least favorite lure to use because of the number of misses. I mean, it causes more swearing and cussing than it does fish catching. But it is, without question, effective. So a couple favorites, Lunker Hunt, the pocket frog, as well as the poppin' frog are the ones that I use most frequently. Though I have tried experimentally many other types, but those two are the ones that I have the best success with. But as long as it's in the 1.5 to 2 inch, maybe even 2 1/4, you'll be fine. Lure number 2, the Buzzbait. Absolutely my favorite one to use. I don't say I always catch a lot of fish with it, but it's certainly my favorite because it's a little less finesse and I can fish it just a little bit faster. The size, again, small. Speed, as I already mentioned, I'm fishing slow, and I don't fish it as a topwater lure. I fish it subsurface, so I move it just fast enough to get the blades moving, and I can tell that by seeing the vibration of my rod tip or feeling the vibration. So, you know, if you have a less sensitive rod blank, you can look at the rod tip, but if you have a sensitive blank, obviously you can just feel it. Sometimes I move it just fast enough to break the surface, but I'm never burning it. I'm using a straight retrieve, and sometimes I'll use a Paus jerk retrieve, but just as long as I get vibration, it's effective. Depth, again, 1/8 ounce. I'm using light lures. We're in shallow water. I'm not using a 14-pound lure to fish in 6 inches of water. The colors I'm using, white, dark colors, red being my best. Sometimes use a black and blue. Again, great as a searching lure. So when you're casting parallel to structure lines, it's great to break up the finesse fishing to see if they're pulling out from cover, casting along, you know, parallel to a shoreline to see if you can draw them out. And if you can't, then you have to come out, break your hollow body frog, cast in deep into that cover and see if you can get them to hit you. What's important to know, you can use trailer hooks. At times it can be a good idea, but I've had times where I put the trailer hook on, I don't catch any fish. As soon as I take it off, cast it in the exact same location, catch a fish. The next thing I think is pretty critical, and it goes contradictory to what I hear a lot of people saying. The wire that goes from the hook to your line tie, I want that wire as thin as I possibly can. It gives the most amount of vibration and movement to your lure. And if it gets bent out, who cares? Bend it back. Bass fishermen have been doing it forever. If you bend the bass, bend your buzzbaits out all the time. You just bend it back. It doesn't take that much. You'll only get so many bends out of it. Maybe you'll get 20 bends out of it, but you'll actually have an effective lure. I find generally that the time that I'm getting my stuff bent up is whenever I'm netting snakehead, because as soon as they get in the net, that's whenever they really freak out and they have a lot of leverage over top your lure, so that's when I get bent. So if you want to preserve your lures, use lip grips and pull them out and unhook them, and for the most part you're going to preserve your lures. I never use plastic trailers pretty much for anything, usually because whenever I'm fishing it's so slow, I don't really get a lot of vibration. So I guess if I was burning things, I'd be fine. But since I'm not, I have more of a finesse presentation. My favorite buzzbait lure is the Booyah Pond Magic Buzzbait. It just is. It's an 1/8 ounce. It's really the only one that I've caught a lot of fish with. I've tried many other buzzbaits. I have a box full of buzzbaits. The Booyah Pond Magic is the one that has caught me absolutely the most fish. My favorite one to fish. Lure number 3, spinners. Whether the standard spinner or the inline spinner, this is, I guess if you have to have only one lure, this is probably the one that you should have. Size, small, and Colorado blades. Those are the ones that give the most thump from my experience, and those are the ones and type that I use. Speed, again, just fast enough to feel vibration or see the rod tip move. Action, same as the Buzzbait, straight retrieve or Paus jerk retrieve. Depth, so we're talking about weight, 1/8 of an ounce. Colors, white, dark colors. Same as the Buzzbait, it's a great search bait, casting parallel on the structures. What to know is this is probably, if you're going to go out and talk to the people that catch the most snakehead, this is probably their #1 lure, especially if we're talking about the inline MEPs. They have definitely got a #3 and a #5 in their bag, and the guys that are really catching a lot of fish, they probably caught 1,000 fish on each one of them at least. The only thing that's unfortunate, just from my experience, is that if you're using an inline spinner, a lot of them have treble hooks on them. Treble hooks and snakeheads are a pretty dangerous formula. They can unhook themselves quite easily, and because of their bony skull, sometimes you'll think you have a good hook set, but if your hooks are dull or whatever else, you can be pulling one out and having that hook go right into your face or somewhere else on your skin. So whenever I'm fishing for snakeheads, if I'm not keeping, I'm not using treble hooks. And the reason I say that is if I'm keeping, I net the fish and I take a hammer with me and I hammer the fish while they're on the net. I don't have to worry about it. They're dispatched. I unhook them, cut the gills, put them in my kill bag. I'm good to go. So having a inline spinner, I'd recommend getting a #3, #5 MEP spinner. And just for a standard spinner, my favorite is the Booyah Pond Magic micro spinning bait. I mean, you might think it's too small, but I've caught a lot of big snakehead and a lot of other fish on that lure, and the vibration and action it gives is the best that I've used. Lure #4, the Chatterbait. I have a love-hate relationship with this lure. We'll get into that in a minute, but the size, again, I'm looking at a small lure. Speed, I move just fast enough to feel the vibration. Generally with a Chatterbait, it doesn't make a difference if you have a sensitive or a non-sensitive rod, you'll still feel the vibration because it's usually pretty significant. The action, I'm generally just using a straight retrieve unless I'm not getting a lot of action, a lot of vibration, then I'll pause jerk to make sure I get that blade vibrating. Just always want to have vibration. The depth, that's the weight. I use 1/8 ounce and 1/4 ounce. I use more 1/4 ounce because the 1/8 ounce chatterbaits that I'm using from Z-Man, I have a difficult time getting them to consistently chatter. And if it's not chattering, what's the point of having a chatterbait? So the 1/4 ounce versions, I have an easier time, so I use them more often. Color, white, dark colors, black and blue has been pretty successful for me. The uses for this is great for whenever you don't really have a good line of sight. If you're in stump fields or in spatter dock and other sorts of places where the snakehead doesn't really have a great line of sight, having a chatterbait, I mean, they'll heal you from 100 yards away. I mean, they know you're in the water. Sometimes you'll see them, you throw the chatterbait in there, you're working it through the water, you'll see something 50 feet away just jump as soon as you start, you'll see a snakehead jump as soon as you start chattering that lure. It's also another great lure for casting on a fry ball. So you cast it past them and you pull it into them. And once you do, this fry will go crazy. And if that snakehead hadn't been hooked before, again, it's about to get hooked. And that's a sort of lure that they generally don't miss. When they hit the chatterbait, it's not like a topwater frog. You're going to have a pretty good chance of getting on that fish. What to know if the chatterbait has a skirt, because some chatterbaits just have the blade and a hook. But if it has a skirt, I don't ever use a plastic trailer. And that's just, as I mentioned before, I have a hard time getting it to vibrate with the speed in which I'm retrieving these lures. I have used some that are just a blade and a hook, and then I've tried soft plastics on them. I still don't get great action out of them. I still use them sometimes. The thing that is the love-hate aspect is, man, do they ever get hooked up in wood. I mean, if I have wood a mile away, that lure hook, I mean, it's searching for wood. It's not searching for fish. It's searching for wood. I mean, I spend a lot of my time trying to pull chatterbaits out of logs and swearing too. And then the next thing you know, I'll catch 3 or 4 fish right in a row. So it keeps me putting the chatterbait back on my line. So the favorite chatterbaits, the ones that have just been the best for me, I've tried other brands, are the Z-Man. Those are the ones that generally work the best for me. I use 1/8 ounce and 1/4 ounce, the original Z-Mans. I mean, you can use the jackhammer and some of the other ones, but they're generally heavier. And because they're heavier, I don't use them. Lure #5. To me, this is the jack of all trades, and you definitely have to have a dedicated rod for this particular lure. That's the Swimbait. Size, I'm looking at 3 inches to 4 inches. Speed, slow, just fast enough to get tail movement. The action, I'll either have a straight retrieve that's relatively slow, more of a finesse, And then I'll also even have even a more finesse presentation where it's the drop, the Paus, drop, jig, retrieve. So I'll cast on location. You can cast it tight in the cover, especially if you're using a Texas rig swim bait. Cast it tight in the cover, let it drop to the bottom, and I'll jig it up, reel it in, and rinse and repeat. Depth, that's the weight. It's either weightless or 1/8 of an ounce max. If you're in 6 inches of water, you don't need a heavy EWG. Color, white, natural color. The color that generally works the best for me has been, without question, black top, silver bottom. It just has. It is great. This lure is great as a follow-up for missed topwater strikes. So sometimes you can get them to hit that topwater again, and it's really tempting just to keep casting it over and over again, especially if they're missing it. A swim bait for the snakehead is a great follow-up lure. You miss the topwater, cast back on them with the swim bait. I mean, I've had a pretty high success rate with, after missing topwater, using a swim bait as a follow-up to hook into a fish. Some days, that's all they're going to hit. That's the thing that I've found. No matter what you're doing, all of these lures, there'll be one day or some day that's the only thing they're going to hit. And some days, a swim bait, that is the only thing that's working. So you definitely want to have that as part of your arsenal. And I think all 5 of these lures are pretty much the most critical type of lures. You can have other things that you add that are ancillary to your arsenal, but I think those 5 are what you should start with, and I think they will give you lots of success and you'll catch a lot of fish using all 5 of those. Alright, we took a look at what I think are the 5 most important lures to have in your bag. Now let's talk about some of the other equipment that you might want to have. We'll start off with a rod. I think you might want to have one of those. The one that I use is predominantly a medium power rod, fast action. There are people that say that you need to use a medium heavy or heavy if they're deep in cover, you can't pull them out. I've pulled snakeheads out of deep heavy cover with medium and medium light rods without much problems. I don't know what problems people are having, and I don't know why people are trying to push a medium heavy rod. I don't really understand it, but I've always found that I have the best fight and action with lighter rods. The lighter the rod that I can use, the more fun that I have. In fact, medium, I'd rather use medium light, and I most often prefer to use a light action rod. That is the best fight that I get, because snakeheads, whether you like it or not, they put up maybe 5 seconds of fight. They're not a great fighting fish. They'll give you a little bit of aerial display in that first 5 seconds, which is always fun, always great to see, but it's not really a hard fight. And lighter action equipment, generally I have a lot more fun. And whenever I'm hooked into a fish, I've not lost a fish because my rod wasn't heavy enough power. The next thing, reels. The reel size just happens to be with the pairing, the selection of the rods that I'm currently using. I use 3000 and the 2500 series reels are typically the size of reels that I use. And the line that I'm using ranges from 6-pound test to 12-pound test. I don't go any further than 12-pound test because I've never, ever had a case where I needed to go more than that. I catch 50-pound striped bass on 12-pound test without a problem. I can catch a maximum of a 20-pound snakehead on 12-pound line, no problem. One of the other pieces of equipment that is pretty important for snakehead fishing, especially if you're new to the game, is a large and a deep net. If you have a shallow net and you try to put one of them in your net, they will be out of your net a lot. The first snakehead I ever caught was a 29-inch snakehead that was about 10 pounds. I had a shallow net. It took me about 30 minutes to wrangle that snakehead into my kayak because it was jumping out of my net, jumping into my face. I'm glad I didn't have treble hooks on, I was lucky. It was a hollow body frog. So a deep net really gives you your best opportunity to keep them inside the net and also let you close the net. So once they're in there, you basically take it perpendicular to the water, you've closed the net, and they're not going to be able to jump out. So a deep net, I think, is pretty critical. Next thing, if you're going to be catching and releasing, lip grips. Some way to hold on to the fish while you're trying to remove the hook. Moreover, I think a jaw spreader in that case is critical, especially if you're catching and releasing. They're not going to like it. They're going to flip around, jump around, but these are toothy fish, and people are generally concerned that they're toothy fish. What you're going to find is they're not like bluefish that are snapping at you. They close their mouth and keep their mouth closed. It's sometimes all you can do to get them to open their mouth. You're spending, especially if you're catching and releasing, you can spend 15 minutes trying to get their mouth open. But a jaw spreader, it'll keep it open, give you your best opportunity to get that hook out. If you're keeping fish, my opinion is you use the hammer-scissors combination, not a knife. Some people, they want to take a knife and they'll stab them in the brain or something else because of the bony skull that snakeheads have. I do not recommend using a knife because it's a formula for at least breaking your knife tip or cutting yourself. A hammer allows you to crush their skull, dispatch them very quickly. And a pair of scissors, you just cut their gills, bleed them out, and put them in your process bag. It's really quick. My general flow is catch the fish, have it in my net, close the net, hammer the snakehead on the head, cut the gills, put it in the bag. I'm in and out in seconds. I can process a fish as quick as I want to. If you're trying to catch and release or you're trying some other methodology, you know, that's where people are fiddling around for hours at a time, having the snakeheads jump all over the place. Those are the 3 things I recommend that basically make your fish processing quick. Deep net, hammer, and scissors. The next thing, you might want to have a towel in your kayak or on you because, man, they are slimy. I mean, these are some slimy fish. It can confuse you. You're thinking these fish are tasty, but after you get all that slime all over you, you just wonder, like, wow, what do they taste like if they're this slimy on the outside? But I guarantee you, they are delicious on the inside. And finally, one other additional piece of equipment that I would recommend is wire cutters. If you, especially if you're fishing treble hooks, you do not want to have a snakehead tethered to a treble hook and your skin at the same time, because that's going to be a formula for tearing you to pieces. Having heavy wire cutters, you can cut that snakehead off of your skin as quickly as you possibly can, and you know, going on the first aid for yourself. But you definitely don't want to have a situation where you have a snakehead tethered to you via a hook. My final thoughts on snakehead: I do love chasing after them, I really do, but not for the same reasons that everyone else does. People talk about their fight. In my opinion, their fight is not top-notch. Again, you get maybe 5 seconds of fight. You'll get an aerial display. It's fun to see. It lasts for about 5 seconds for the most part. Every now and then you get one to strip drag, but it's not really a hard fighting fish. That's just how it is. The hardest fight you get from them is when they're out of the water. That's not really the fight you want. Flopping you, smacking you in the face, and yeah, just all kind of mayhem. And the topwater claim for these fish are exaggerated. There are times, especially whenever I'm fishing over hydrilla mats and I'm using topwater hollow body frogs, that I can get some real good explosions on topwater. But for the most part, it's more about, I mean, that's all you get, just this little sucking action. They're not like a largemouth bass. On average, largemouth bass, if you fished after them, their topwater explosions are far more significant. So the primary draw, in my opinion, to this fish is how great they taste. It's nothing to do with their fight or anything else. They are slimy on the outside and delicious on the inside. So for me personally, if I'm out fishing, I have a bag. I have a 24-quart bag that I keep with me. Whenever it's full, I'll release the rest of them. But until I've filled that bag up, I'm keeping as many as I can possibly keep. These fish breed up to 5 times a year. We're not going to be running out of them. The places that around the world that have had snakeheads and they are invasive, there is no one who has exterminated them. They persist in every location in which they were introduced. So I would say, as far as concerned about whether or not you're going to make the snakehead go extinct, that's not happening. So for me personally, my philosophy is I keep as many as I can, and after I've filled my bag up, I release the rest. Well, I hope this information helped you, and until next time, I guess I'll see you on the water.